my great-grandparents were slaves and built this country, and no fascist would drive me out of it.
Well, happy day, good people, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy, and we're glad you're here because this week has been a lot.
It really has, Nora. Normally, we end the show with our 8 ounces of joy, but today we're going to bookend the episode with joy because we're going to need it to carry some of what we're about to talk through.
Yes, please. I fully support this approach. If someone had told me that 2026 was already over, I would honestly believe them because it feels like we have lived several lifetimes and many, many news cycles per day since January 1st.
Absolutely. It is like a decade in, a month and a half at this point. But I will say, before we get into the heavy listeners, please do permit us 30 seconds of petty regional gloating because the Pacific Northwest is temporarily beaming with pride. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I feel like our region is not, I mean, we're known for like books and like
Yes.
foggy landscapes and trees. We are not always known for our sports prowess. And
True.
Marcus and I have been specifically not talking about anything sports related for
Yes.
more than a month now in
After
the
that,
hopes that we would have good news.
yes. After
So
that Mariners mishap, that's,
we
solely
carry
on
that
you,
load.
Nora. Solely on you.
um, I was so excited to have an actual uncomplicated, like, beaming moment of joy this week, and so I am allowing it, but, with some protest as a public health person.
Yes. Yes, of course. Of course. There's some issues with the sport itself, but you know what? We'll set those aside just for this moment.
Yes.
Because the Seattle Seahawks, our Seattle Seahawks, they are Super Bowl champions. Since our last episode, they won it all. And our fan base, just so people know, yes, it is Seattle Seahawks, but there's not another football team within like light years of Seattle. So our fan base ranges all the way from Hawaii to Alaska to Montana to northern freaking Oregon.
Yes, yes, and it really felt like everyone was turned out for this game.
Yes.
As I mentioned, I'm not always the best football fan. Like with all the injuries and
Yeah.
stuff, it sometimes feels a bit like watching competitive smoking or something to me.
I do
But
understand.
even I was like genuinely excited about this win.
Yes, and I will say I'm not I was gonna say that I don't typically gloat about sports publicly, but I do. I actually do. So I'm not going to pretend it wasn't satisfying to beat a team owned by Robert Kraft and based in the Boston area.
Amen. Amen. If listeners don't understand why this combination makes us clap a little harder, I guess I'm advising you to Google Robert Kraft massage parlor, definitely not at work. And then Google Boston school busing desegregation crisis because there's a lot of history to catch up on there,
Oh
folks.
my god, yes. Yes, there is. There's some great documentaries, by the way, about both the busing crisis, in quotes, and then also Boston's police department. And
Yes.
it might tie for most vile with the Los Angeles Police Department in terms of
Yes.
historically. I will, not to make light of the NYPD or Chicago, but anyhow,
Yes. Marcus, I knew we had won when my friend, who is like a lifelong diehard Patriots fan, I mean, I have watched her when the Patriots are losing have to like take herself to another room to have a little cry. And I texted her after the game and I was like, I'm so sorry. My condolences. She was like, honestly, at least someone who wasn't in the Epstein files won. And I was like, okay.
You talk about silver linings there,
Yeah.
Nora. Absolutely. Um, I gotta say, I did not go to the parade just because I was unfortunately under the weather, but seeing folks together, and again, yes, I know that sports can, take up an oversized part of life, right? I mean, particularly when you want to talk about the money that gets, unfortunately, gets funneled into them, away from other priorities, specifically from other civic priorities, whether they be education, infrastructure, and so forth. But again, I can't lie. Watching a parade where you had nearly 1 million people outside on a balmy day in February here in Seattle, just being goofy together. Some people were dressed up as Darth Vader. Other people were dressed up as Elmos for some reason. I don't know how that aligns with the team, but whatever, man. I mean, it's like just people just really just going out and having fun. And that was particularly at a time like now where joy can be in short supply for a lot of people, specifically, particularly collectively. Um, it was I couldn't help but have truly just a smile on my face most of the day. So
Yeah, same. And I want to correct you there, Marcus. I think it was 1 million happy people and one extremely well decorated pony.
Okay. Well, fact checking me in real time, I appreciate that, Nora. I appreciate that.
No, it really was like the city was kind of exhaling for the first time in a while. And for a city that doesn't get to celebrate a lot of wins like this, it felt really joyful.
It really did. It really did. I gotta say, I was able to watch it on on YouTube. They were streaming it on multiple YouTube channels, and my favorite moment of the whole thing was Ernest Jones, a Seahawks player, for those who don't know, giving a speech that was, shall we say, was very spirit led, you might say.
Spirit forward.
Spirit. There you go. There you go. Yes. Yes.
He seemed less than sober, I would say.
Don't check the blood alcohol content.
And I believe he started the speech by saying no one should have given me the microphone, which is great. But that somehow made him feel like the most honest public figure we've heard from all year, or at least this week.
Yes, I gotta say, I mean, it's a rare speech where you're just like, this man is saying some very inappropriate things that I absolutely wish that I could say. So yeah, I've sent that clip out. I think it's about 34 seconds or so. I've sent it out to friends, family, at least one person who owes me money. It has just been like a form of just, I don't know. It's just been very cathartic, I gotta say. Yeah.
Yes, it's a little bit like that scene in Office Space, right? But football version.
Yes. Yes.
Do we have the clip?
Let's run it if we can.
I'm gonna keep it a buck. I'm probably the last person they should have gave the mic to. But we finna turn up, man. Shout out to these badass motherfuckers who play this game the right way. Not only do we have the best defense in the world, we got the best team in the world. And quite frankly, if you got anything to say about my quarterback, you got anything to say about my defense, you got anything to say about my O-line, and you got anything to say about the city of Seattle, I got 2 words for you. Fuck you!
No, Marcus, I feel like what he was saying perfectly captures like the spirit of 2026. It is like exhausted and defiant and euphoric and absolutely done being PC about anything.
Absolutely. I mean, and to your point, this is the most truthful I think I've heard a public figure speak in maybe the last 4 or 5 years. I do think he maybe took it to heart a little too much, the fact that Seattle public schools were not excusing absences for the students. So he was probably like, hey, there's just nothing but adults here, so let me drop the F-bombs indiscriminately. But that being said, yes, I think that is going to be a meme that lives in Seattle lore for some time. Like anytime anybody says anything bad about our city, it'll just be like, if you have anything bad to say about Seattle, bam.
Play the clip. Play the clip.
Absolutely. Well, Nora, say what you will about Ernest Jones being a little less than sober, but I gotta say that he sounded more coherent than anything that Attorney General Pam Bondi said when she was testifying in front of Congress this week. My God.
When we start talking about barely coherent, though, I mean, I never know which member of the cabinet you're going to talk about, Marcus.
It's the most recent. Yes, whoever is the most recently in front of Congress. That's usually who it is. Yeah.
I mean, that hearing was like watching defiant incompetence collide with diabolical intent. It had the tone of like a student who has done none of the homework all year being called out in class and then just like screaming at the professor, like, how dare you ask me questions? It's like, no, because that's what we're here for, my friends.
I will say, Nora, when I was watching that, I was wondering if it was like harkening back to some dark memories for you, like when you sort of first started out in academia, where you're just like you're dealing with an unreleased student, and you've caught the person in a
My
lie.
God, Marcus, I have never had a student that badly behaved in my life.
Jeez.
Not even close.
Says a lot about where we are right now in politics. But I gotta say though, Nora, I mean, ultimately the centerpiece of it all for many people was the Epstein files and the way Bondi handled the release, especially after victims' names were inadvertently disclosed when they were supposed to be redacted. And that's even though there were some names of, quite frankly, some very unsavory people who were redacted
Yes.
in what was released.
Yes, it is very clear who's being protected here. And I think what made that hearing even worse is that, of course, many survivors were in the room. They were seated right behind Bondi. This wasn't abstract. Their presence was, I think, probably one of the only moral facts happening in the hearing.
Yeah, there's actually a photo that I saw. I think it was in The Guardian,
Mhm.
where the survivors are standing up, and you have Bondi who is just looking down, sort of
Yep.
sullenly, and it's the kind of whatever she was trying to say with this air of defiance. I mean, that to me, right, the picture is truly worth 1,000 words, and it said it all. And Representative Pramila Jayapal from our great state of Washington, she actually made a direct appeal asking Bondi to apologize to those women for the harm caused by that sloppy release.
Yep. And shocking no one, Bondi refused to do it. I think what did shock people, though, was she wouldn't even turn around and look at them. Of course, she pivoted to attack. She accused Congresswoman Jayapal of theatrics,
Right.
and then acted like she could shout her way out of responsibility.
Yeah, it felt just like this Uber Trump playbook, right? When you
Mhm.
face tough questions, you just directly go on the offensive. You frame yourself as the victim or the president as a victim. Right?
Also, like citing the stock market. I'm sorry. What?
You talk about the hardest pivots of all
All
time.
of these survivors in the room, but hey, my stocks are doing okay. So
Right. That's what we don't want to talk about, right? I mean, that's the if only you caught us there. You caught us there.
this is the Trump philosophy of governance. It's deny, counterpunch, treat accountability as disrespect. Um, that wasn't a rough hearing for Bondi. That was a deliberate choice by the administration to treat Congress like a piece of gum that was stuck to the bottom of their shoe.
That says it very well, Nora. That says very well. I'll say, like, Representative Jamie Raskin, who was there in the hearing, said flat out that she was siding with perpetrators and ignoring victims. And he warned her that an Epstein cover-up could be her legacy, Bondi's legacy, if she didn't change course.
And I mean, I don't see how it couldn't be her legacy at this point. But Bondi basically shrugged, refused to engage, refused to take responsibility, leaned into personal insults. At one point, she called Raskin a washed up loser lawyer. Like, are we on the playground?
Right. I mean, this is just like, my God. I mean, when again, I mean, not to go back to Ernest Jones, when a professional athlete, speaks so much more eloquently than our attorney general. I mean, it's, where are we at? But I gotta say, I mean, for me, Nora, that wasn't even the most revealing moment of the whole affair. Like, I think the most revealing moment was her demand that Democrats apologize to the president right there in a hearing about Epstein-related misconduct.
Yeah.
You talk about some gall. You talk about some gall.
I mean, the whole Epstein package is loyalty upward, never accountability, protect power at all costs,
Yeah.
and never acknowledge the vulnerable. I mean, that's the entire thing, right?
Absolutely. And and then, I mean, we get to talk about the hearing all day, but beyond the hearing, and I think we were communicating about this offline. There's new reporting about Epstein's ranch outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, called Zorro Ranch.
Yeah.
And it's been making, I think, both of our stomachs turn all week, to be honest with you.
I mean, you know it's bad with the release of these files when, like, every time you talk to someone else in your circle, like, they have a different set of horrors that they've been following than you do, and, like, they're all true, and you're just sort of comparing notes on, like, all the things that have traumatized you this week. I mean, but yeah, Marcus, like, this is a classic Epstein story in one sense. This is vast property, immense secrecy, people alleging
Right.
years of abuse as, like, the tip of the iceberg, honestly. But you also have this really chilling pattern of just institutional and judicial neglect.
Right. I mean, because so many of his properties were searched and scrutinized over the years. He had a New York property, Palm Beach, and an island, of course. But apparently, federal authorities never searched the ranch around the time of his arrest. Yeah, I mean, to your point, right? It's just like that. How much evil was this man doing across the globe at this point?
I mean, Marcus, most Americans can't even, like, go to an airport these days without having their cell phone searched.
Right.
But, like like,
Right.
oops, we forgot about the ranch in New Mexico? Um, there are emails suggesting that prosecutors told people in 2019 that they hadn't searched that property. New Mexico officials have said they were asked by federal prosecutors in New York to essentially pause a state investigation.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing, Nora, that might be reasonable in like a coordinated prosecution. Except when it produces the effect of nothing happens and time passes and evidence dissipates and the public is left with fragments.
I mean, it does sound like a somewhat familiar playbook here, Marcus. I mean, the FBI has been pulling the same stunt in Minnesota with the murders of Alex Preddy and Renee Good.
Absolutely. And I don't know, the fragments of what we know, continue to be horrifying, even though they are just fragments at this point. Like survivors have described being summoned to Epstein's bedroom, being isolated, being coerced, being trafficked, being this one got being forced to give birth to babies that are then taken away from them. It's quite frankly, it's unbearable even to summarize. I mean,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
And that's before you get to the photos, the images, the videos, all these faces of young women that have been redacted and just the powerful men all around them. And at least for me, it really is reinforcing this reality that, like, I think we always knew, but we didn't know it this viscerally,
right,
which is that exploitation is not on the margins. It is
right.
right at the heart of power in our country.
Yeah, which for me, it brings, I don't know, it brings this sort of to one of the more disappointing factors of this story. And quite frankly, just I'd say, just speaking for myself, more painful revelations that I've been grappling with over the past few weeks, and that's Noam Chomsky's
Oh, right.
relationship
Yeah.
with Epstein. And for those who don't know, I mean, Noam Chomsky, in terms of uh, quote unquote principled intellectuals, he was somebody who I think had been a model for
We
so
thought
many
he was
people.
principled.
Right, right. He had been such a model for people. He had, obviously his work with called manufacturing consent around media manipulation and so forth. I mean, that
Yeah.
has been anybody that I think who has come of age as a left-leaning person has obviously either read or been familiar with Chomsky's work. The fact that he's had been so outspoken on what was going on in with Gaza and Israel. I mean, the fact that he had been so outspoken about American imperialism. It's just extremely disappointing, and but at the end of the day, it just goes back to the fact that ultimately individual people are people and human
Yeah.
beings are human beings, and they are and just because I think I was listening to the Unfucking the Republic podcast, and
Mhm.
I think they said it best, right? I mean, it's like, no level of genius or being on the right side of things 95% of the time, makes up or negates, has what is now proven to just be just a horrendous, not only lapse in judgment, but the fact that that Chomsky was willing to uh, be around this man after he knew after he knew that he had been charged with pedophilia.
I mean, and him and so many others, right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like we're in this horrible period of moving from like, that classic saying of like all your heroes are problematic, and then now it's like, oh well, now you should search Control F in the Epstein files for all your heroes because like
Right.
one never knows.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Nora, I mean, the files show Chomsky communicating with Epstein, meeting with him, staying at his properties, flying on his plane, and in 2019, giving Epstein advice on how to respond to public scrutiny.
Ugh, yeah, the detail that really hit me was when he was like framing his advice back to
Right.
Epstein. He described the public outrage as hysteria
Yeah.
about the abuse of women, suggested that even questioning a charge in the kind of Me Too era had become treated as worse than murder. I mean, this coming from someone who claimed in a lot of their work to stand for the powerless is really a damning indictment of their internal worldviews.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that he was too smart to be that stupid in
Yeah.
in terms
Or
of
to not
economic.
understand what his words really meant there, right? Yeah.
Right, and I know, I believe it's, Valerie, Chomsky, who's married to Nam, has said that they were careless and that it was a grave mistake and that Epstein deceived them or presented himself as a philanthropic friend, but, I don't know. I mean, honestly, the apology sort of sounds like, what everybody else has said who's been caught up in these files. It's almost like I'm more sorry that I got caught as opposed to being
Yep.
sorry that it actually
Yep.
happened. I don't know.
Yep. Yeah. I am no longer forgiving of private proximity to predatory power.
Yeah,
Marcus.
that's perfect way to say it. Yeah.
Well, I think the real question is what this moment teaches us about how power works and how it has been working in our systems for a really long time. I mean, Epstein was not just exploiting young girls. He was exploiting reputations. He was exploiting our hyper capitalist system. He used association as cover for crimes that he was committing along with many other powerful people over decades.
Right, and I think that's what he understood, right, about elites is that they often confuse access with innocence,
Mm.
and if someone invites you into their world and says, "Hey, we're discussing important things," well, you can start to feel like the room itself is proof of morality.
Yeah, I mean, we knew this. This is how predation survives, right? It doesn't just survive through violence, but through politeness and prestige and people assuming the best about those who have the nicest clothes and apartments and connections in the room.
Yeah, well, and that leaves the rest of us, sifting through the extraordinarily horrific and yet still deeply incomplete rubble of that mess.
And what a mess it is. I mean, Margaret, it kind of feels as if the entire public is trying to piece together like a forensics of what happened here via like TikTok videos and internet sleuthing and conspiracy rabbit holes. And this doesn't feel healthy. It feels necessary, but it doesn't feel healthy.
Yeah, it's hard to look away from, Nora, right? And I think that's what we're reduced to when we have a government that wouldn't know the truth if it walked into the Oval Office and sat right on top of the Resolute desk, right? It's an administration that continuously is built on lies.
Yeah. And I just feel like in this second term, all of us are so caught up in that web of lies and half truths and conspiracy theories at this point. I mean, the FBI has obstructed so much justice that we basically are relying on like influencers and true crime book clubs to piece together the Epstein files with what feels like the forensic equivalent of Elmer glue sticks and kitty fingers, but like it's a lot of it seems true, but it's very hard to know what's true and when and where and what to believe.
Right, and I think it's that complexity too around trying to spread the word about this on platforms owned and operated by some of the very people
Ding, ding,
in
ding.
these files. I
Yes.
I just can't see how we find our way to truth on this one, or at least I can't see how we do that in any type of clean, clear fashion right now.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, truth does seem a lot more elusive than an affordable grocery trip these days, but that's saying something.
Yeah, well, particularly with the predatory surveillance pricing, yes. But I gotta say, Nora, yeah, I mean, the confusion, the lies, the don't trust what your own eyes see was also on display along our southern border this week in the airspace above El Paso.
Oh, yes. In the space of several hours, it went from being a 10-day closure for unknown military threats and then reopened hours later, and then they were told that they used a laser to shoot down a Mexican drug cartel drone, and that turned out to be a Mylar party balloon. Did I get that right, Marcus?
I I believe so, right? I mean, in this far-fetched fan fiction that we are given as official excuses here, but I don't know. All of this happened before I had my first cup of coffee Wednesday morning, Nora.
Yes.
I mean, this news cycle is truly, I don't know. It does not give a fuck about sleep. Let me tell you.
And before the day was out, all of us had to go to sleep once again with the highly unsettling knowledge that someone in this cursed government decided that it was a good idea to give customs and border control like space lasers.
If they didn't have enough lethal tools to deploy on unsuspecting party balloons and bystanders by now, right? I mean, they've got space lasers. My God. My God. I know they were having trouble finding qualified recruits, but it feels like it's taken a turn straight for Austin Powers and the Minions or something. Oh, God.
Yes. Well, given these extremely disconcerting distractions, it's a wonder any of us have time left over for our actual jobs, let alone the second shift that many of us are carrying right now, which of course is organizing in our communities.
Yeah, I will say, Nora, the work is truly endless and it's one battle after another, to quote the movie. But it does also give me hope, I gotta say.
Yeah. Yeah, for me as well. I mean, as much as seeing the throngs of cheering fans at the Super Bowl parade filled me with pride, I think I'm carrying even more pride these days for my neighbors who are showing up. They're sitting down around dining room tables and on signal chats late at night, organizing all the time against ICE and against so many other things that are disrupting our communities.
Absolutely. And I just gotta say, Nora, to merge the fandom and the activism against ICE, I do want to direct people to a friend's Dashery account. She has shirts that if people can see, it says "Go Hawks and fuck ICE," and it is all the proceeds directly go to the Immigrants Rights Association here and Immigrant Rights Solidarity Network here in Washington State.
I
But
love this.
that
Like all the slogans you need on one t-shirt.
absolutely. I mean, that's it wouldn't be Seattle without it. So that that being said, Nora, there's something else I've been noticing lately, particularly after my trip to Minneapolis, is that people who are brand new to protests and folks who maybe never saw themselves as activists before, but are suddenly finding themselves out in the streets.
Yes. And for a lot of them, a lot of us, this may be their first experience with being labeled as a problem just for showing up in public and saying, this is completely not okay.
Exactly. They thought they were participating in democracy, but many of them are learning that power often calls that dissent, and not in a celebratory marketplace of ideas kind of way, but in a we're watching you right now at this very moment kind of way.
Yeah. I mean, there really is a disorienting moment when people realize that peaceful assembly can look very different depending on where you're standing and who has power. And from inside the crowd, it can feel like care and concern and community. And from the vantage point of authority, it can get reframed as threat.
Yeah, and that reframing happens fast. A march becomes a disturbance, a rally becomes a security issues, neighbors holding signs become agitators.
Yeah, we really are in a moment where what civic participation is being rapidly transformed by or trying to be rapidly transformed by people in power. I mean, as people are discovering that the right to protest is real, so too are they discovering the discomfort that power has with being challenged right now.
Absolutely. And historically, when that discomfort sets in, language is one of the first tools used to
Mhm.
contain it. right? I mean, you look at Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were called domestic terrorists
Yeah.
by the aforementioned Pam Bondi. And I mean, that's just an example of how vocabulary shifts in a way that makes ordinary people sound dangerous.
Which is how you end up in a place where gathering together, even in grief or in hope, gets narrated as a threat to others rather than a form of civic participation.
Yeah, I mean, Nora, one of the things that keeps surfacing in all of this, whether we're talking about the Epstein files or congressional hearings that feel like performance art or powerful people closing ranks, is this question of who gets to define the story.
Mm-hmm.
Because when institutions fail or stall or deflect, there's always a second story unfolding. And that story usually starts when people gather.
Yeah. I mean, and historically, when people gather, especially when they gather in dissent, power does tend to respond by redefining that gathering as a threat. And I think it's important for us to say that is particularly true for Black communities and communities of color, whose organizing has always been more quickly reframed as uncivil, as disorderly, as threatening.
Yes, which brings us to our guest today, because few people have traced that arc from protest to backlash, from hope to retrenchment, from Obama to Trump to whatever this era is becoming, as clearly and as rigorously as Jelani Cobb.
Jelani Cobb joined the Columbia Journalism School faculty in 2016 and became dean in 2022. He's been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 2015, and he's the author of several books, including The Substance of Hope and To the Break of Dawn.
Yes.
Also produced and co-produced documentaries like Whose Vote Counts, which earned a Peabody Award, and Policing the Police. So when we talk about institutions, journalism, power, accountability, he's not only been in the room for all of it, but he's the expert narrating it.
Absolutely. And his latest book, Three or More is a Riot, Notes on How We Got Here, 2012 to 2025, feels like required reading for this moment. Because it's not just about protests in the streets. It's about how we narrate upheaval. It's about the backlash to Black political power. It's about the ways journalism both illuminates and sometimes distorts the stakes of the era. And frankly, it's about how we ended up here.
So if you've been feeling like the last decade has been a blur of hope, rupture, reckoning, reaction, we hope this conversation helps you to slow it down and make sense of the through lines.
Dean Cobb, just thank you so much for appearing on our show today. This is just a tremendous book. It's a collection of essays, but I will say it should be required reading. For those who have not read it, it is absolutely essential in terms of just the framing of this particular time and just positioning us in this particular time period that we find ourselves in. The title of the book is Three or More is a Riot, which actually comes from an old legal definition. And so I want to ask you, what does that phrase reveal about how the state has historically viewed collective Black action?
Oh, I mean, it comes from two places. The title comes from two places. The first is the colonial code in South Carolina, which after the Stono Rebellion of 1739 effectively defines a slave revolt as three or more Negroes, as we would have been called at the time, outside the company of a white man. So if you had three Black people together, you were violating the law, unless there was a white man present with you. And, that's related to demography and the kind of the fear of collective Black action. And when you kind of translate that forward, some of the stories that I was covering, and that theme just kind of emerged, time and time again, and it became, reminded me of the civil code, now, which, in many places defines a riot as, civil mayhem committed by three or more people. And so, as I will say, if you have just two of you, then you're just acting a fool. But if you have a third person, you have a proper riot.
Thank you. It's such an honor to have you with us today and to talk about this really important work. I think one of the core themes of the essays in this book is tracing how Black protest is often labeled disorder or
Hmm.
riot rather than democracy in action. Can you um, can you walk through for us the book's argument about what collective action by marginalized people and especially Black people means in this moment, and in the last, 10, 20 years, and how it's been continually portrayed as threat rather than emancipation and something that moves our country forward.
Well, one of the sub themes in the book is, the first piece in the book is uh, titled Trayvon Martin and the Parameters of Hope. Um, and it, inadvertently, the first thing I ever wrote for the New Yorker was about Trayvon Martin. And unknowingly at the time, there's no way any of us could have known that, it was really about the inception of the Black Lives Matter movement, which comes directly out of his death and the subsequent exoneration of George Zimmerman, for killing him. And then it goes from there to all the kinds of dynamics that we saw emerging, Ferguson, to Charleston, to Freddie Gray, to all the way through up to Breonna Taylor, up to and including the death of George Floyd, and how that movement was from the outset disparaged and characterized in ways that placed it outside of the idea of it being a tradition, part of a democratic tradition in the United States. And so that's one of the things that kind of jumped out at me as I began going through the pieces and thinking about what I would include in the collection.
Yeah, sorry, before I ask the next question, I remember getting the opportunity to talk to Tracy Martin, Trayvon's father, once at the National Association of Black Journalists gathering, and he said, "Hell, they're trying to denigrate my son for wearing a hoodie." And he was like, "These white folks been wearing hoods for 200 something years, and they're
We're not talking about that.
yeah, exactly, at all." But anyhow, that being said, several weeks ago, and I know I believe that I saw you comment on this already, but several weeks ago, Don Lemon and Georgia Ford, both Black journalists, were arrested for covering a protest inside a church in Minneapolis. How do you read that event through the critical themes of protest, Blackness, democracy, and journalism that run as a current, through your book?
I think the primary response I had to that was as a journalist, and it is part of a bigger pattern of assaults on the First Amendment. So there are people who have a protest inside a church, complicated dynamics, there are First Amendment protections on both sides. And so you have a right to protest, you also have a right to worship, both of those things protected by the same amendment. Rather than that being kind of handled in a way that grapples with the complexity, it wasn't, including the journalists who were there covering the event, another First Amendment dynamic. And so only one element of the First Amendment is considered. These other elements are not. I mean, coincidentally or not, these other elements relate to a Black organizer and two Black journalists, which only exacerbates the dynamic. But I also think that it fits into this bigger pattern of hostility toward freedom of the press that we've seen for more than a decade now in Donald Trump's public life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're speaking to a number of sort of double or triple standards in terms of how both the law and public opinion get applied to these events that shape us as a nation. You also write about how sort of outrage about property damage during protests often outweighs outrage about the loss of Black lives.
Sure.
So why do you think the idea of well, I'm gonna bring in the idea of not damaging property or being, an excellently peaceful protester. Why do you think that often registers as more important to us when we think about the kind of rules of protests than thinking about and centering the loss of life of human beings?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it depends on what human being you're talking about, you know, because going back to the piece that starts the book, on Trayvon Martin, self-defense in Florida and in other states that had the stand your ground law was basically an encapsulation of the old football, adage that the best defense is a good offense. You can commit offensive acts in the name of self-defense, but it only applies when you go to the data on this. Juries are willing to accept those kinds of defenses from white defendants, statistically unlikely to accept those kinds of defenses from black ones. And so it's really about the value of life, because when we get into the conversation about property damage, which I think is a significant conversation, I'm not somebody that thinks we should just dismiss this, for reasons that I can come back to. But one of the things that happens there is that it's easier to grapple with the concern about property damage than it is to grapple with, is another way of devaluing Black lives and saying that, these things will be prosecuted, but the loss of Black life often is not. Now, on the side of the property damage, and just to be kind of clear, when I was in Ferguson, I happened to be outside a CVS that had been burned down. There was a few things that had been burned down. And I was talking to another journalist who I hadn't seen for a long time. We were both covering, the story, ran into each other, we're sitting outside talking. And an elderly woman comes up. She was hoping that the CVS, lots of things in that area had been set on fire. She was hoping that the CVS had not been burned because she had to get her prescriptions. And, this was an elderly Black woman in a community that was not really well served. And so the destruction of the CVS really wound up having implications for her that really are part and parcel of the same dynamic we're talking about, the value of people's lives.
Yeah, and as we talk about the value of people's lives and whose lives matter and whose lives have been prioritized throughout the history of this nation, I kept thinking about that as I took a reporting trip to Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, and was at the vigil for Alex Preddy, and there was this white man who had the shirt on, young white man who had the shirt on and said, "Stop killing us." And I had this sort of bitter complexity about that in the sense that Black folks have been trying to tell folks that for years, in terms of that these tools and apparatus of state violence won't just be us who, are constantly impacted by it, like that eventually, they'll be turned on others, right? And so I'm just curious about your thoughts on, as you sort of see this moment where some folks are newly awakening, if you will, to what, Black people have been trying to tell them for so long. Do you think there's a part of me that wants to be like, is this too little too late? There's another part of me who wants to be optimistic that maybe this time folks will be permanently awakened, if you will. And then there's another part of me that's like, this is America, in 5 minutes, relatively 5 minutes from now, I think somebody will be on to the next thing.
Yeah. No, I think, it would be amazing if he was referring to everyone with that shirt that says us. I would love to think that. I don't know that. I don't know that person. I don't know how inclusive the idea of us would be. But there is a dynamic. I wrote a piece in the New Yorker a few weeks ago about Viola Liuzzo. Was a white woman from Detroit who went to Alabama in 1965 to support the voting rights campaign and was killed. She was killed by Klansmen. And the that was a shock to the nation because the deaths of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, for at least Goodman and Schwerner, were a shock to many Northerners because it introduced them to a fact that Black people had been well aware of for a long time, which was that white supremacists would kill white people in service of maintaining their hierarchy over Black people. And I mean, that's the story of the Civil War, at least the South side of it. And so, but that has been lost. That message, that knowledge had been lost. And so people see this and they're shocked by it. But also, Goodman and Schwerner were Jewish. There's an element, maybe there's an element of anti-Semitism here. Maybe they're not thinking of them. Maybe they're thinking of them as people who you can kill, right? When Viola Liuzzo is killed, it makes people confront the fact that they are willing to kill a white Protestant woman. They will kill women too in service of their cause. And I think that often we forget things and we have to relearn them in painful ways. And, the fact that Alex Preddy and Renee Good had come out to defend communities of color, the Somali community in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and their advocacy had so enraged the ICE officers that they used fatal force against them. And then, I won't even have the dignity to dignify it with repetition. We know what that ICE agent said to Renee Good after he shot her. So I think that that's what we have to understand, is that this kind of volatility, this type of contempt, and this type of hatred is metastatic, that left to its own devices, it will spread.
In addition to your extraordinary writing for The New Yorker in this book, you are obviously also the dean of Columbia Journalism School, and we're in a bit of a moment for challenges for journalism. And you write a lot in this book about thinking about the role of the press, and not just how it covers uprisings, but how it covers civil society. How are you thinking about teaching and training your own students right now for the world that journalism is living in, and the kinds of roles that they can play to support democracy in all of its forms, rather than to be a sort of handmaiden to its demise?
No, I think, the thing that, first I have to say that I never despair over the future of journalism, or at least not the future of journalists, because I have this amazing group of people in the building, this group of students who are every day, coming up with amazing story ideas and like innovative approaches to journalism and all of those things. So that's a personal benefit I derive from being dean. In terms of preparation, we're doing everything. We're refining, how, our guidelines and our ideas around AI, how we want AI to be used, how we don't want AI to be used. That, we are using, these new incredibly sophisticated technology tools to do investigative journalism that, quite frankly, would have been beyond our grasp a few years ago. And at the same time, we see that they can be used for misinformation and disinformation at scale and all those other things. We're teaching them safety protocols and, how you create a risk rubric for your reporting, because that's something that more than ever journalists, and we used to think of this generally by default as your preparation for training abroad, but no, that's applicable now here in the United States. And, we have a data program, we have a documentary program, we have all these other kinds of ways of storytelling that are really dynamic, and so that people are prepared, to meet the needs of the journalism industry, of the media organizations that they'll be working with. And so we do a lot of things, and we're also training them to, with the best practices for going out and doing independent reporting, if that's a route that they choose to follow as well.
Yeah, that might make one of us in terms of being hopeful for journalism. But I will cede the ground to you though, Dean Cobb. I do want to ask you, because we recently celebrated I'd say a pretty horrific anniversary in January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, witnessing the coverage recently of some of the protests that have been going on in Minneapolis versus some of the, quite frankly, literal whitewashing of January 6th, it just reaffirmed for me kind of some of the things you touch on in your book, where it's clear that anger, when they come from communities of color, but specifically Black communities, is often treated as inherently illegitimate or dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
When you had, again, January 6th, this is essentially an insurrection and a coup, but it's in service to white supremacy that is now sort of sanitized, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, what happened on January 6th is important for not just the reasons of what we saw, right? But it was a great barometer for what the public, and particularly the supporters of the president, are prepared to tolerate, prepared to countenance, and prepared to justify and rationalize, which means that there may not be a bottom. That was an active attempt to prevent the peaceful exchange of power from one party to another, from one president to the next. There's that. The other is that I've often said, I have a PhD in American history, the concentration in African American history. And, the appeal of African American history is that, for me, is that it tells, this incredibly complicated story that's reflective of the story of the broader country, and so on, so on, and so forth. But really, at its core, the history of Black people in the United States is a barometer. It's a barometer of our tolerance of anti-democracy. It's not the only barometer, but it's a pretty good one. And so when we think of ourselves as having this incredible democratic tradition, I was like, yeah, except for those 11 states that nullified 3 or 4 constitutional amendments for a century, just decided that they didn't apply.
Yeah, I'm curious about your understanding of history, and of Black history in particular, seems so essential to your journalism of the present. And I guess I'm wondering if you can kind of talk to us about how that deep knowledge of history is informing the way that you're observing and writing about the moment that we're in right now.
Oh, I mean, I used to say this often, that covering current events feels like seeing your syllabus jump off the page, your history syllabus jump off the page, because so much that is seemingly historic, or things that elements of the past have reemerged. When we look at the attempts at voter suppression, which never entirely went away, but the kind of overt strategies for it now, the overt alliance and allegiances with white supremacist elements, which people thought were a relic of the past, the nativism and xenophobia, which just seemingly jumped out of the 1924 Immigration Restriction Act and reasserted themselves in the present. We could go on and on and on about these things, and history is really important. If we don't understand the roots of how we got to this moment, then we never have any hope of trying to navigate from it.
And Dean, before Nora wraps us up with her final question, that's kind of what I want to ask you this question. We've seen so many professors and folks in high academia leave to other countries. Timothy Snyder famously. We've seen other folks, Randall Robinson, who wrote his book "Quitting America." He may rest in peace. Passed away 3 years ago. You know everything about this country, like literally in terms of it cannot lie to you. It cannot put any sort of mascara, if you will, over its sins. Why do you continue to fight and do the work that you do? Why not just go ahead and pop over to St. Kitts and call it a career and and leave us, here to sort of wallow in whatever fresh hell might await us tomorrow?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like my life is here. I also feel like Paul Robeson, when Paul Robeson, who was the was the son of slaves, people who had been enslaved. Both his parents had been enslaved. And when he was hauled before the McCarthy Committee and questioned about, his travels to the Soviet Union, one of the senators said, if you like the Soviet Union so much, why don't you just move there? And Robeson responds, because my parents were slaves and they built this country, and no fascist will drive me out of it. So
Yeah.
I always think about what that meant for someone to say that, and if I'm saying my great-grandparents, I think great-grandparents were born in slavery. And so I'm a late life baby. So my father was 50 when I was born. So I think I'm like one generation shorter than most people my age, getting back to slavery. But for him to be able to say my parents were slaves, and then I'm saying like my great-grandparents were slaves and built this country, and no fascist would drive me out of it.
Thank you for that. All right, one last question, and then we'll let you go. Although I feel like we could talk to you all day. So you've obviously been dean of the Columbia Journalism School during a pretty tumultuous period for the university as well.
Mhm.
I say this with a complicated relationship with Columbia, where I got my PhD. So
And what
I've been
school?
public health.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm very cool with the people over there.
Yeah. I've been really moved by some of the speaking and writing that you've done about the student protests around the genocide in Gaza and the way those have been met on the campus with force and condemnation and federal targeting. How has your knowledge of protest movements influenced your leadership on campus at this time? And also, have these campus protests challenged or changed your understanding of resistance in any ways?
I mean, I think that it's very interesting to be able to see kind of historical parallels. So here's one thing. In 1986, I believe I have that right, it's a gigantic protest and occupation at Columbia to end apartheid. And then, of course, famously, there was the 1968 protest that culminated in, all sorts of police violence being directed at the students and so on. And there were people who participated in the 68 protest and people who participated in the 86 protest who came back during that 24 protest. And there were these kind of intergenerational connections, around, those same sorts of things. And, for me, as a historian, I had like the kind of contrary impulse. I didn't take any notes. I didn't write anything because, I'm a dean, and that can get complicated. I'll leave it at that. but I was certainly observing and having lots and lots of conversations about movements, where they go right, where they go wrong. My own recollection of the 1989 Howard University protests, which I participated in, which was to get rid of Lee Atwater from the Board of Trustees. And so I think all of those things were kind of in my mind as we were kind of dealing with that. And then also mostly funneled through the lens of trying to advise my students so they could do the best coverage possible.
Dean Cobb, thank you is not enough, but it is all that we have at this moment.
Thank
and
you.
I will say it is, you are a national treasure, sir.
Yes.
And thank you so very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Nora, such a wonderful conversation with Dean Cobb. By the way, I'd forgotten that you had gotten your PhD from Columbia. So
It's not something I try and bring out in every conversation, Marcus.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I got to say, absolutely loved the conversation with Dean Cobb. He is not a man who suffers fools
Yes.
at all. So it's amazing for him to be able to live through this, our current era, I'm sure. But, loved what he said, though, about, the question that I asked him about why he continues to do what he does, and in terms of being here in this country and fighting for this country, and the fact, as he said, right, there's grandmothers and great grandmothers, our ancestors essentially, who built and bled and
Yes.
contributed to this country, and
I'm not leaving it.
I'm not leaving it. Exactly.
Yeah, it was so, I want to write that on a piece of paper and stick it to my wall.
Yeah.
And also just this reminder that we've heard from other people on the podcast as well, that history lives so much with us in the present, and part of our responsibility to the present is to understand that history honestly and unabashedly, and live with it.
Absolutely. Well, I'll say that conversation was joyous, but shall we get into our official 8 ounces of joy for this week?
4 ounces of joy.
Yes. We're bookending you with joy, as I promised at the beginning, folks.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I will say, Nora, I I'd said it before, but I think honestly, just to be able to see so many people at the parade, and again, in such, we live in such divisive times, right? We live in times where, it's hard for folks to unify around anything, particularly because there is no monoculture anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so to have, almost 1 million people again gather, from various backgrounds, some folks apolitical, some folks very political, and to just really enjoy each other, right? That the fact that there are, again, almost 1 million people in downtown Seattle. I know there were folks worried that, there's only going to be 900, officers. So if something happens, what's going to happen? Right. And you had all these people essentially self-policing themselves, right? Watching out for each other. I think there's only one pole that actually fell down because, one guy got on there and was maybe a little heavier than he thought. But other than that, literally no incidents either. I think just the fact, right, whether you're a fan of sports, not, whatever, think they're terrible, think they're great. The fact that you had 1 million people coming together, with very late notice in terms of I think we only knew we were going to have the parade, since Sunday, obviously. And be able to, again, just be in a very joyous celebration of camaraderie. That, to me, that it's a small example of what, we can really do when we come together. So
yeah. Say what you will about the Seattle freeze, but Seattle really does know how to gather a crowd and get together.
Yeah. If we could work on that the other 364 days of the year, that'd be great. But anyway, what about you, Nora? What was your joy for this week?
Well, I think like many people, Bad Bunny, basically.
Yeah.
There was just this collective joy in the resistance, decolonizing narrative of that show that I just feel like I'm going to have to be turning that on every time I feel overwhelmed with the state of the world, because it was just so full of defiance and defiant joy. And I just feel like may that be the vibe for all of us this year.
Yes. I love that you could experience it on so many different levels, right?
On a slightly nerdier note, Marcus, I also want to note that because Seattle won the Super Bowl, Seattle Public Libraries got to send a reading list to Boston Public Libraries. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
It is the pettiest gathering of literature that I've ever seen in my life. It includes all of these great Seattle books, but many of them have titles that are like rubbing it in Boston's face that they lost, including Loser, the real Seattle music story. And this entire list is just like such a testament to like nerdy, petty librarian joy that I am loving it, and I'm gonna make sure it goes out in our show notes this week.
As you should. And Boston, you deserve that. I just gotta say. I'm sorry if we have any you know what, if we have any listeners in Boston, you know that you deserve it. So come on. Anyhow, that being said, we're gonna close up shop for the day.
Well, the Republic is somehow still standing, slightly wobbly, possibly held together with duct tape and group chats, but standing nonetheless. We thank you for helping it stand with us. And if you'd like to support the show, help us continue covering national chaos and converting it into digestible podcast-sized portions, please head to inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. Your contributions fund the very important work of turning our collective raised eyebrows into structured sentences.
And a massive thanks to Jelani Cobb for coming through with the kind of historical receipts that make you sit up like you just got called on in class. And maybe you didn't do the reading, but he did for all of us.
And a huge thanks to our producer, Jessica Partnow, who bravely listens to us spiral in real time, and then through sheer skill and caffeine, edits us into something that sounds like we had a plan the whole time.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Jessica. And shout out to Aham Aluo for music that convinces people this show is cooler than two middle-aged academics discussing institutional fragility has any right to be.
You can catch In the Meanwhile Wednesdays at 5 on KVRU or wherever you stream podcasts, while pretending to fold laundry but actually doom scrolling on your phone.
Yes, and new episodes drop every Friday. Until then, drink some water, log off occasionally, and remember that gathering with other humans is still legal, mostly.
Take care of yourselves, and until next time, we'll see you in the meanwhile.